Hello and welcome to a football podcast. My name is Devang Desai and I'm joined as always by Mr. David Goss. On today's show, we interview Columbus Crew President Tim Bezbatchenko fresh off the 2020 MLS Cup triumph. David, it's been quite the year for T-Bez, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is probably what he had planned, right? He was like, I got to build a roster that is resilient to global pandemics, massive layoffs, Orlando-based full tournaments, and then home-based MLS Cup. So, I'm assuming that was his blueprint, and he nailed it.
I think this is our final show of 2020, and it made sense to talk to someone who, as you touched on, David, I think maneuvered all the wildness that was 2020, the best of anyone in MLS, to assemble a squad that was good enough and built well enough to peak at the right time and frankly stun Seattle in the final. We talked to Vez about that, about Columbus's roster construction, and we also get a little nerdy, David.
Listen, I think anyone who listens to this show knows kind of what we know of like how weird Major League Soccer is, but we spoke to Angus McNabb a few weeks ago from the CPL, and these leagues fascinate me of like, what's the plan? What's the goal? How do you win, but also build a league and build players? There's so much going on. And I think in my mind, Bez is the best guy to ask these questions to because he has done a lot of these things already, but he's thought about all of them. And he's going to be one of the ones who creates the future of soccer in this continent. So I think you and me have talked a lot so far since we've started this show about a lot of these things. What does MLS want to be? What is the future of the sport? What type of players, transactions, all these things. And I think we kind of came around at the end too. Bez is the best guy to answer all these questions for us so that it's not just us wondering constantly.
I think the puzzle that is TAMGAM, etc., is hard for anyone to work out. But Bez is one of those guys. And just going back, DG, through some of the successful teams he's built and the rosters he's built, it's the way he's acquired these players that screams MLS and knowing the league. And not to say that someone who doesn't have experience in the league couldn't pull these off, but I think it's definitely helped him. And a lot of similarities as well between that 2020 Crew side and the team that won for Toronto in 2017.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were talking about Marky Delgado as an acquisition before we jumped on of like, they got that guy in the Chivas USA dispersal draft who ended up starting an MLS Cup and a CCL final for his team. Now you look at Columbus, where in Toronto it was mainly overseas acquisitions and signings. And now in Columbus, it's been a lot of trades, homegrown players on top of Zelarayan. So he's kind of pushed every lever in MLS history and he's done it pretty well. And even moves where it's like, I'm pretty sure he traded for Evan Bush before MLS Cup even happened. So he's constantly working and moving and doing these things, but it's the reason his teams remain competitive year after year.
We get into some future stuff regarding MLS and the league in general, but we also touch on the past. And I know a section of our fan base is supporters of Toronto FC and what happened in 2014, the change of this franchise, the course change, bringing Greg Vanney on and what happened after that. We touch on that, David. I think you talk about alternate histories or where things could have gone a different path, the butterfly effect of those series of events in 2014. What a different timeline we could have seen.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about it too because, full disclosure, everyone, we're recording this a week or so early. LAFC just lost to Tigres in the CCL final. And I've been talking to a friend who, me and him have been doing this for 15 years of watching CCL and being heartbroken. And you start talking about the finals in 2018, comes to mind. And then the era of Toronto FC and now what can Columbus do going forward and Bob Bradley and Michael Bradley. And there's so much going on right now that I've been thinking about with how close MLS is, how far it is, where it even is that I'm talking about getting to and all those things. And I think we mentioned it a few weeks ago on the show, but I think Garth Lagerwey taking over in Seattle and Tim Bezbatchenko taking over in Toronto, and I would put Ollie Curtis as well taking over in New York, kind of, to me, is another era of MLS in the .0s. And so it's pretty cool to think about the way these guys have changed this league.
You chose to bring this up, so I will pick at this scab. Do you think Markey should have scored on that chance in the 2018 final in extra time?
Yeah, 100%. And that was my friend's first response yesterday when I was like, it happens this way every time. That was his first response. But you know what? Whatever. We don't need to dig back into it. But didn't Michael start in center back that game, and Vasquez was healthy for 45 minutes and Josie was hurt? I don't know. That's a rough run, man.
A lot of things happened.
I can still picture Pizarro's free kick just floating in over Bono. I was like right behind it when it got hit at BMO and was like, there's no chance that goes in. And it still haunts me. I'm sure it haunts you worse.
Good times. Okay, quickly moving on from that. Street talking to Bez. David, I think as we cap this year and go on to 2020, where MLS goes from here is one of the things that we talk between ourselves the most. And listen, the pandemic isn't over, and the league has to plan around that and how they get these games off and what the schedule really looks like going forward. So there's plenty to discuss with Tim Bezbatchenko of The Crew. Enjoy our discussion with him after the break. Welcome back to A Football Podcast. Joining us on the line, Columbus Crew president and recently crowned MLS Cup champion, it's Tim Bezbatchenko. What's up, Bez?
Nothing, guys. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. I think it's serendipitous. You're chatting with us on Air Canada headphones, I believe.
That's right. It's kind of a symbolic of how this year has been. There's not a lot of people in the office today, and so trying to find headphones so that Gas can hear himself speak.
Cannot hear himself speak.
So it's a gift for Gas. But I didn't have my Bluetooth around here, so I looked in the back of my drawer and I found this nice set of Bluetooth airline headphones. So it's sort of how 2020 works, right? You make do with what you got.
It's also classic Air Canada, always reliable, never let you down.
Oh. That's right. Great airline. Nothing but great things to say about Air Canada.
True. Fez, we've had a few days, a week or so to kind of regroup after your club's triumph against Seattle in MLS Cup. I was wondering the final few minutes of that game, what was going through your head as you saw this club win the Cup for the second time in its history?
There were so many emotions, to be honest. We sit in a suite that has a mix of technical people and commercial folks. And there's so many emotions because there's so many layers to this win and this championship for this city and this ownership. So during the game, you're trying not to think about what the result will be until it happens, because we've all been part of teams and games that it takes a quick turn. So it's not until that final whistle, even though we were winning, that you really let it sink in. And so my emotions were deep. First and foremost for the city and the fans, including my family, who even when I was with a different club up in Toronto, they stayed true to their black and gold. So I think just tremendous satisfaction and joy and humility at the fact that we were able to come back here and build something that the city could be proud of. Second, our ownership, thinking about their in ways, trials and tribulations with sports so far with the Cleveland Browns, who are doing very well, by the way, but the ability to give them and the Haslams, and then obviously Dr. Pete Edwards, not only the first playoffs, but their first championship, I think was extremely meaningful to everybody involved. And then the last layer is sort of this idea that we're moving into a new era and what it means for our ability to close what was Montfray Stadium, which has now been removed. As I look out my window, it's now we're calling it back to Crew Stadium. But what is a historic venue for this building that I've had so many experiences dating back to my high school days. And so for me, there were so many sort of off-field issues that were sort of coming together. And then you talk about the work that Caleb and the players and Pat Onstedt and Issa Tall and Neil McGinnis, all of our soccer operations put in just to make sure that we could be playing the game, let alone putting out our best starting 11, because we weren't even sure, leading up to the New England game and leading up to MLS Cup, who would be available for our team. So I can't tell you how nerve-wracking that is. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to experience in my professional career, is going day to day, waiting for the results to come in, having the calls not knowing if on the other end of the line, Chris Schenberger, our head athletic trainer, is the person that's sharing the information with me, but not knowing if you're going to have who you're going to have the next day or who Caleb's going to have at his disposal for the game. So I could go on and on, but the emotions were plenty. But it was at the end of the day, it was tremendous joy and satisfaction and relief.
I'm curious. Obviously, you've won MLS Cup before, but in different times. What was a 2020 MLS Cup win and celebration like? I mean, you mentioned the pregame of you don't know who's available, and now you're not really allowed to be in places and see people, and you can get to the parade. What has it been like since that victory this time, maybe compared to last?
Yeah, it's been a little bit different because last time in Toronto, after 2016, where we played so well, they didn't have a shot on goal, and yet we failed to win because we lost in penalty kicks. And so all of 2017 was this idea that we need to make good for what happened the year before. And then it turned into a historic season with a treble. So it became the capstone of something that was a historic season. And there was a lot of pressure on the guys, and I think you felt it. And so there was tremendous relief. And then it quickly rolled into, let's win Champions League as well. So I think in Toronto, there's this idea of let's keep it going. And whereas this one is certainly that. I mean, we want to keep it going. But in a year of COVID, I think it means so much. It means something different to the people and the city, given what everybody has gone through. So the emotions on the night were a little bit different. And then since then, the buzz in the city is still here. I think everyone is talking about how they can't wait for the new stadium to open, and they're just talking about the story, right? That 3 years ago we weren't sure that the team was going to be here. The owner wanted to take the team and leave, and now we are sitting here champions, MLS Cup champions. And I think everywhere I go, I'm not going to many public places, but certainly in my neighborhood and on all the Zoom calls and then all the notes, the outpouring of joy and happiness for the club from all of our a lot of new partners and old partners alike is tremendous. And we're still on a high. Even it's draft season here in MLS, and as we get on all these calls to do drafts, thinking about roster building for next year, it's just there's a sense of pride that you have in what you were able to accomplish last season, and what was great about it was the way that I felt we did it. The guys overcame a number of challenges, COVID throughout the entire season, but they played so well throughout the playoffs. We were in first place, I think, over half of the entire season in the standings, over almost half of the season of the weeks we were in first place. And so it wasn't a surprise to us that we were in the finals. I think other people like other storylines, but we hit, a spell with injuries that hurt us. But we knew once if we could be able to get some momentum and get a couple wins before the playoffs that we were going to be a team that was going to be hard to beat in the playoffs. And we were just so excited to have that opportunity and finish it off against, a team that has been so good over the last, 3 or 4 years in Seattle.
Well, when it was confirmed that Darlington Nagbe and Santos would be out, Bez, when was the decision made that Aiden Morris would be the guy? Was this the sort of thing where it's like, all right, we know who we're going to pivot to. He's ready for this amongst the club?
Yeah, so Pedro was early in the week because we play the game on Saturday, I believe, against New England either Saturday. And then we found out we do testing that night right after the game. And maybe that was a Sunday. And then so we found out on sort of Sunday night, Monday on Pedro. I mean, Darlington was Thursday morning when we officially knew during training. And so Caleb asked to be told, regardless of the outcome of the confirmation of the positive during, even if it's during training. And so he already had Aiden in sort of the tactical walkthrough set up. So I would say it was immediate. I think right when we had a sense that there was a positive, I think you look down and I think in terms of what we needed out of the game and what we wanted to do versus Seattle, it's going to look a little bit different than Darlington, but Aiden has a tenacity and an intensity that probably one of the highest in the team in terms of his ability to attack the ball and win tackles. And people don't give him enough credit of what he can do on the ball. He's an 8 that can play, and sort of that double pivot is sort of a 6'8". And he looks to play the ball forward. So in some ways, he's a little more vertical than Darlington, who's going to wiggle around players and keep possession. Aiden can do that, or Archer sort of assumed that position from Darlington, and Aiden plays more of the direct vertical ball. So I think to answer your question, it was pretty immediate. There wasn't a whole lot of back and forth. Now Caleb might tell you in his mind he was thinking about it for about 24 hours, but I think we all knew that what was probably going to happen.
I want to ask, and we're going to talk about academies a little bit more coming up, but I remember being in BMO Field when Jonathan Osorio started in the final, and it was like, wow, this guy's an academy guy who played at this level, but that was a much different age. Did you ever think you'd see something like this where an academy player as a teenager would be able to step into MLS Cup and not just even be at that level, right, but highly perform, be one of the better players on the field? Like, did you think this day was something you'd ever see, or see this quickly?
Probably not this quickly, but we don't think about that too much. We don't think about I think that's fun to talk about sort of on shows like this, but what we're trying to do is build a winner.
When we're wasting time, not real soccer.
No. It's important. No, I think in Toronto, I remember we had a goal of, over half the roster to be homegrown by 2022. And I think the first step is that, where building your roster where the backbone is your academy, and we're trying to do that here as well. The next step is to have a certain number of players actually performing for your team and winning championships, and I think Osorio is a good example of that. I think there are other players on Toronto's roster that you're actually winning trophies. They're on the field when you are playing in championship games. And I think that's the next step. And I think we were able to showcase what that meant to what that means to have a player like Aiden, who's 19 years old. But we see it around the world. And so I think it's really just us sort of catching up to the rest of the world in terms of our academy blossoming into these feeder systems to the first team. And now that we're going to be part of, players need to show that they can win, because then they would maybe be available to be sold, or they actually help you save money on your salary cap, or that's a higher return on your investment to the community, because the community sees themselves in the players that are on the field. So, the returns are 3 or 4-fold compared to maybe another type of player. And I think that's what's so exciting, is I think this is the evolution of the league in terms of being able to showcase our homegrown talent on the fields in important matches that help you win games. And he did that. Aiden did that. And so happy for him. And then there's other players that did that throughout the year. I think, Boubacar Keita and Sebastian Berhalter. And then let's talk about the other homegrown players on our roster. Gyasi Zardes, and the first DP homegrown player who is a homegrown player. Derek Etienne is a homegrown player. And the Red Bulls and Galaxy should be proud of that, because they were able to get, an asset in return, and then that player goes on and has success in his career. And so I think MLS should be proud of the final and the players that are out there, because it does reflect the investment in our full player pathway, as evidenced by the players who are on the field.
I think in regular times, the offseason sneaks up pretty quickly on clubs, cup ends, and it's on to roster deliberations. But I think the season, that takes on some more significance as we are basically right into it. But as I was wondering, building a championship team within the MLS mechanisms and the roster structures, with performance incentives and increasing salaries, keeping a good MLS roster together from year to year is not an easy task. And we already have had the re-entry draft starting, but you've done this a couple of times now. I guess overall, as you re-enter planning for the next season, how hectic is this period, and have this ability to keep this team in place changed over the years? This is a different process now in 2020 than it was maybe in 2017.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, it's brutal having to have conversations in these changes, like literally the day after you win the MLS Cup or lose it, in the case of what happened in 2016. So you are literally celebrating on a Saturday night, and then on Sunday, because players and families were not allowed on the field. We had a family and friends gathering on the pitch on Sunday, tiered and separated based, due to COVID. And then right after that celebration, I think that was from 12 to 2, we had player meetings from 2 to 3. And you're talking about how quickly you have to shift from being, celebrating to having some difficult conversation. It's brutal. And it's not, frankly, it's not fair. And I think we have to change it. And I think everybody would be open to changing it. I know I've talked to Garth about it because we've had to do this a number of times. And luckily we weren't a part of the expansion draft this year, because that is actually probably one of the harder conversations. The players who are coming out of contract or you're not exercising their options, you've spoken to their agent already. The expansion draft is really the hard one. And when you're telling a player that he's not protected, even though maybe they started an MLS Cup the night before. So we were able to avoid that due to Luis Argudo getting picked up last year by Miami. So we didn't have to worry about having that conversation with players. But to answer your question about roster building, it's not hard to keep the team together. It's actually impossible. You literally, in a salary cap world, cannot keep your roster together like you can in other. If you really wanted to, you could in other leagues in other places around the world. So you have to make hard decisions. You have to prepare for it. You have to accumulate assets to help buy down certain players. You have to plan your DP signings and your TAM signings well ahead, and you have to have contingency scenarios so that if you win, it's going to look like this because of the bonuses. If you lose, it's going to look like this. And so there's a number of models that you have to run to plan for different scenarios. But it's impossible in our league. You could do it. You can hang on for a couple years and sort of, what do I want to say? Sort of put glue and tape and try to hang on for as long as you can, but eventually the salary cap sort of monster comes and you're going to have to make a big decision on a player, and that happens sometimes naturally with age, maybe a positional change, maybe a coach wants to change things tactically, but right now we're still in the building up, and that's why it's so excited. Why I'm so excited about this roster is that we're having success right now, but we feel like we haven't hit our peak. And going into the new stadium, we had always planned on adding more players, more special players, maybe another designated player. But now we don't feel like we don't have to. We don't have to do it right during a period where it's hard to scout in person and live. So you have to factor that in. And there's so excitement around this team, and this team's playing well enough that you don't necessarily have to sign another Zelerion just yet. Not that you could find another player at that level, but you know what I mean. You don't find the Javinkos and the Zelerions every day. Those are every few years.
But you did mention another DP. You do have 2 DPs on your team that are on the lower end and could be bought down and create that spot. I guess that leads into a bigger question of just for Columbus as a market, as a franchise, as a club, and then maybe MLS in general. Do you have to make another big signing to keep up? Is there a spot that you think you need that player at, or is that a projection on where the league's going? Where's that thought process?
Yeah, so to answer your question, no, I don't think we have to do it. And I think that's where what we're trying to build here is going to be a little bit different than my former club, where I think the expectations from ownership in the city and is that you're going to be, a super club signing some of the highest paid players in the league. And that's great. And I love being a part of that. And I think the model of what we're trying to do here is a little bit different, which is how can you build a roster and be outside of the top quarter in spending, but still build a championship team and a team that can contend each year. And I think that's the challenge. I don't think you've really seen it since maybe, Kansas City in 2013. Who's really sort of built a roster around players that you don't have 3 players in the top sort of 20 to 30 spend in the league. I think it's more of a balanced roster, and that's okay. And I think people talk about it. You guys talk about it all the time in terms of different identities, but we want to be a profitable club. That's the other hat I wear on a day-to-day basis. Is we're not going to spend with the highest top sort of 5 or 6 in the league. We're just not, because frankly our revenues don't justify it, and we're already building over a $300 million stadium, a $35 million training facility, and so we want to be balanced, not just a balanced roster, but a balanced club, and we want to build to profitability. And I think that's a good thing for our league, is how do we get to a place where we're spending within our means, but we're also building an exciting attacking roster that's fun to watch, and we're winning. And I think, or I know that's our vision for the club, and it's going to be different from every club, from other clubs, because they want to maybe do something different. In Philadelphia, they're doing something different. In Toronto, they're doing something different.
Bez, you had a big opportunity to flex there when you said not everyone can find a Zelarayan or a Javinko or a Vasquez. You have several times, sir.
Yeah, we have. Thank you. I appreciate that. First of all, it's not me. It's a whole team. So
right.
Whether or not it's Jack Dodd and Corey Ray up in Toronto, and then Greg was heavily involved up there, and then down here the work that Neil McGinnis does and Issa Tall and certainly Pat Onstad, and then Caleb was heavily involved. It's not like in other sports where you just sign the player and you say, here you go. In soccer, it is 11 players that have to work together almost as one. And as you guys all know, that it's how the pieces fit together, because they take up certain spaces on the field. So how does Zelarayan work? Because he likes to drift left, and then how does he work with Darlington and Pedro, and how are those going to work together? So it's going to take, Caleb's tactical mind, and then Pat's pragmatism, and then our entire scouting network, Neil, who's there first and sees players, and then our ground scouts in various countries. So I think that's what changed when I came here was we replicated some of the processes that we did up in Toronto, and I think it bear fruit in Zelarayan, because I think we followed a process and we created a competitive process so that at the end you're coming together with 3 or 4 names that you would be satisfied with, but Zelarayan just fit the best within that puzzle.
Time for a quick break for our sponsors. After the break, more with Bez. In terms of adding now to this puzzle, the crew have added Bradley Wright-Phillips to the squad, and you touching on that puzzle, Bez, how does BWP fit into this squad?
He fits because first and foremost, he is by all accounts a great human being and a great teammate. And when you go through championship winning seasons, you want to be careful about who you bring onto your team and the dynamic that it creates in the locker room, on the training pitch every day, because it's not just about the talent on paper. It's about how these players interact. And every time I've interacted with Bradley, as well as all of his interviews, he's always giving credit to his teammates. He's always speaking on about the collective, the way he plays the game. He defends for the team. Just the amount of sheer work that he did for the Red Bulls over a number of years is remarkable. So we're just so excited about the person we're bringing into the club, and I think that speaks to what we're trying to build here. This isn't about the star players and about themselves or the coaching staff or the front office. We're trying to make sure that we're reflective of the values of the city, and so he's a humble player. And then I could go on and on about his skill on the pitch. We all know he's multi. Time Supporter Shield winner, Golden Boot winner. So we're excited about what he brings to the team on the field, off the field. But he will allow us to present a different look up top than Giassi at times. We also know that we're likely to lose Giassi to Gold Cup. We have Champions League, we have US Open Cup, but we don't know how congested the schedule will be if COVID comes back in a different way and affects the season. So there's so many variables at play that having a player like BWP available for your coach allows us to play a certain style and play it both on the road and at home. We're going to have a heavy away schedule first because we're backloading our home games because we have the opening of the stadium in July. So there's so many reasons why it makes sense for us to sign a player like BWP, and so we're excited about having him, but we're also not finished with the roster changes. We're looking to make a couple other signings, between now and the beginning of the year. No, excuse me, not beginning of the year, beginning of the season.
I'm excited just for Brad to potentially win a cup competition. He's been waiting for a little while.
Yeah, you're right. He hasn't done that. That's right. We would love to give it to him, and how exciting would it be to go and make a run and try to do something similar to what we did this year, but in the new stadium for players like BWP, and then obviously Pedro and Darlington who were not able to participate in the final. I think they're going to be looking to right that wrong next year as well.
I wanted to ask you about one of the big players that your coach wanted in Darlington Nagbe, and not just him coming in, but mainly kind of what's gone on in the league around his acquisition, which is these big allocation money trades. We were thinking back to your time in Toronto for a long time. You didn't really make a move like that. And I don't know that the league really saw these moves until the last 2-3 years. And now you're talking about $1 million, 1.2, 1.5 million allocation moving. And Nagbe was one of those. Is this the trend that you saw coming? And how is it maybe different from your point of view in making this move compared to bringing a player in from overseas for a large amount of outlay?
So in Toronto, I never had that money. We didn't have allocation. We had money, obviously, at ownership, investment in DPs, but we never had allocation, and that's because we'd sold Daniel Henry, but we were never able to pick up a big chunk of allocation. That's the only way you can do it, by selling a player if you don't trade a player and pick up allocation. So it's a direct result, in my opinion, of the influx of cash from expansion. So as you know, the expansion draft used to be 10 players, and then they cut it down to 5 and gave these expansion teams more money to spend in the open market. And the econ major in me it thinks about the money supply, and you're increasing the money supply, and that's going to cause wages to increase because there's more money in the system. And so the expansion teams have to go out and build rosters, and they want cornerstone pieces. And so that was Atlanta, from Portland buying Darlington because they had cash. And so I'm not saying that they overspent on him, but at the time that was more money, I think, than ever had been paid for a player. But that's a direct result of the cash in the system, what's called allocation, right? And so what you're just seeing is a trend of expansion teams being forced to go out and buy these players at these prices. And so it's not a reasonable spending. It's not irrational exuberance, as they would call it in the economy. It's just it's actually rational decisions. And so when you're looking to build a team like I was coming in 19 with Caleb, we're looking at key pieces that would put us in contention for championships and play it in a style that was that was reflective of Caleb Porter and also myself and Pat. And Darlington was a key piece. And so it became apparent that we would need to spend. We knew right away that we were going to have to sort of collect and save up to make a spend like we did for Darlington.
Bez, we could talk to you all day, but we know you're a busy man, so we will end on this. It was the end of an era in Toronto. I think a chapter fully closed. I think when Tim Leiweke left, and then you departed for Columbus, that was a change. And then Greg Vanney departing the club himself this year. I wanted to go back kind of to 2014, or maybe even beyond that, when you knew that Greg was going to be the next head coach of TFC, because I think by all accounts, it was a resounding success by choosing him. And as he goes forward, I think your decision to make that change will last long in the memories of TFC fans. So I was just wondering if you could look back on that before we go.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because Jamie McMillan and Corey Ray, two employees, two of my colleagues up in Toronto, have joined us since in down here in Crew. And Crewland in Columbus, as well as Issa Tall, who left Toronto and then went to FIFA actually for a number of years, worked the World Cup, was on the pitch with France when they won actually, and then joined us here in Toronto, or in Columbus. But we talk about obviously the family up in Toronto that we had left, and Greg and his staff, and Jim Liston and Dan Couchman, Robin Fraser, Nick Tesloff. They were part of the family, and you become really close with them, and certainly even more closer when you go through hard times like we did in Toronto. And certainly the coaching change we made in 2014 was one of the most difficult experiences and things I've ever had to go through. We were actually we were in the middle of a build up in Toronto when we made that change. Greg brought Greg on as our academy director and my assistant GM to actually build our academy up there, and we started TFC2 at the time, and so it was actually not part of the plan. I know people like to think it was. They've talked about like it was, but Greg wasn't sure he was ready to be the head coach at the time, and he'll tell you that. He loves player development. He loves bringing kids along as they become men and work into the first team. And so that's what I was so excited about was giving Greg the opportunity to find himself as a head coach, but to do it in a way where I knew he would invest in the players from the academy. He knew them. He traveled with them to, I think they went to Qatar and South Africa together. This is like Ayo Akinola's the 2000 class. Greg literally went on trips with them as the academy director. And so to see him succeed and change and evolve into a not just a good head coach, but a great head coach is it's really special for me, and I think everyone that has watched Greg succeed over the years, and he's such a good person, and so I'm just so happy for him and his family. For him, it's such a great story. It's very similar. I'm returning to in a way to sort of it reminds me of sort of coming back to Columbus. This is my hometown club, and I think Greg's meant so much to the people in LA, and I don't know if that's where he's going, but it seems like it. I haven't spoken to him about it directly, but if he does end up there, then what a great homecoming it would be for him. But it is, clubs change, clubs evolve, projects, end, and I think Greg's spoken about the project ending up in Toronto, and I felt in some ways that was also part of the decision for me to leave. I felt like some of the building was already done there, and they were moving into a new era. But leave it to great people, and Bill Manning and Ollie Curtis, who are some of the closest friends of mine, and great executives who no doubt will figure things out and make great decisions to keep Toronto at the top up in Toronto. Obviously, I'd give shout out to Larry Tannenbaum as well, who's going to do whatever it takes to win, and such a great ownership that they have up there.
Bez, hope you can take some brief time at least to celebrate the holidays with your family and everyone in Columbus, and celebrate this massive achievement by yourself and the club in 2020. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. You guys stay safe. Happy holidays, and I'll see you in a few weeks, I'm sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Bez.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Major thanks to Crew President Tim Bezbatchenko for joining AFP. And that's it. We did it. 2020 is in the books, David.
This is what we do. We finish on a high. I'm ready to just eat carbs for the next 4 days. That's kind of my plan. So that's what I was referencing towards. And yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll be back in a week or so. So it's not really that big a deal.
Exactly. It's the globe keeps spinning. But he's on the show right now. He's just in the background working the ones and twos. But I wanted to take this time to thank Nick Andrade for being great, being a great producer and co-host of the show. And anyways, wanted to remind you guys, we're on Twitter at a football pod. So join us there. We're on patreon.com/a-football-pod. Join us, get the show ad free, chat on the Discord, and get more interviews like the one we just did with Bez, which I think is pretty cool. And we'll hopefully get to do more of those. David, anything else you want to say before we depart?
No, just happy whatever people do to everyone out there. I guess Happy New Year, technically. And jump on Patreon. That's where we're going to get all our soccer takes out, a.k.a. trash Liverpool somehow, and get Nick riled up, even though they're the best team in the world. So yeah, jump on over there.
For Nick, David, and myself, thank you so much for listening to AFP. We'll talk to you next week.